Hello everyone, welcome to the first part of Yami, The Winged Hero BNHA Vigilante FanFic. Be sure to like, share, and check out the author, Starlight Anon, on Wattpad. Their O3 account will also be in the links down below. So please give credit to the author and be sure to check out the links in the description down below. And with that, let's begin. Also, an Eddie Itora note, I'll be testing out this voice, so y'all be sure to tell me down below how it sounds, as well as me adding more from the fanfic to the story as some more background details. Anywho, back to whatever degenerate stuff you were doing. Disclaimer, MHA doesn't belong to me, but Kohei Horikoshi, this book contains strong language, blood, abuse, depressing topic self-harm, suicide attempts, abandonment if you can't deal with these. Don't criticize my book. I gave you a warning. Also, there will be some homosexual relationships. If you don't like that, you can leave as well. Abandoned at a young age and forced to fend for himself. Izuku Midoriya, a young male striving to help those who aren't. His drive pushed him to train as soon as he was thrown into the streets. The boy had a quirk, a fairly strong one at that. His quirk gave him a wing mutation, 4 large wings placed on his back. It also gave him shining toxic green eyes and small green feathers under his eyes. He adorned sharper nails and teeth, seeming to be based off a predatory bird, but instead of a sharp beak, he was given sharp teeth. Follow this young male, and he strives to become a strong hero. But as he is unable to attend schools, follow him with the struggle of teaching himself and going through vigorous battles as a vigilante. Where will this story go? Started writing, Jan 20. T20 published, Jan 22. 2020 ended, Jan 31. 2021 #1 in Vigilante Izuku Feb 18. 2022 cross posted on AO3. Any other sites are stolen. 20 Aug 2023. Prologue. The young boy known as Izuku Midoriya has never lived an easy life, and by the looks of it never will. The boy will eventually get used to the facts of it. But enough of that. This is how his story starts. The beginning of the great vigilante Yami. A happy, beaming boy ran through the hallway of his home with his usual bright smile. His bare feet slapped against the fake wood that tiled the floor. Voices sounded from the living room as the child made his way through. Today was a special day for him, and he was overflowing with excitement. "Hisashi, can't you stay longer?" asked a feminine voice that the child recognized to be his mother. "Inko, I can't. This is important work," the male countered as his voice was laced with anxiousness. At that, the child ran into the living room, landing his bright green eyes on his parents. His bright smile dropped slightly as he saw the expressions on his parents' face. The woman looked down at the child first, her straight green bangs pulled behind her ears and tied at the back to keep her hair tame. Her expression shifted from a slight look of anger to pity on the small boy. The boy, seeing this before, knew where this was going. His smile dropped into a thin line as his eyes trailed to meet with his father's matching eyes. "Izuku, I'm sorry. I can't celebrate your birthday with you." The boy, Izuku, deflated at his father's words and his shoulders slouched. This was the same as all the years prior. Izuku was now 4 that day, and his father would leave again without the ability to celebrate. And this year was the most important. It was to check what quirk the child had. Every child got one at the age of 4 years. Most, at least. The 20% of the world that aren't blessed with that gift are deemed useless. Given the title quirkless, most die before they are adults anyway, with their suicide rates higher than normal quirk children. "I'm sorry, Izuku," Hisashi drew out his words in a long sentence, as if he was dreading to leave his child once again on a birthday. "It's okay, Aru-senfei," the small boy answered with a sad tone in his voice before brightening up. "Can we go get ice cream before you go?" exclaimed the child with a bright smile adorning his features. Said male glanced at his wife before nodding and smiling softly at his child. "Of course, we can all go." His words made the small boy run happily to the door to slip on his favorite red sneakers, grabbing his All Might action figure that lay on a table. The boy and his parents arrived at an ice cream parlor in due time and got a variety of flavors for each. Each of them liked a different flavor for specific reasons. They were just right for them. But their peaceful family outing was interrupted by a crashing noise and a boom. Smoke filled the air and screams of terror sounded from all around. The smokescreen didn't aid their escape at all. The green-haired child was scooped up by his father as his father gripped his mother's hand tight. It was a run for their lives as the boy cried and clung to his father for support. His father was focused as he led them safely away. That seemingly safe route was proven wrong when a shadow towered over them. To their terror, a box truck was hurled their way, with no way to escape it. The mother of the child was thrown to the side by the father first. Everything was in slow motion as the boy's father threw him away from being crushed by the large truck. Tears poured from the ducts in his eyes as he screamed out to him. "Authausen!" screeched the child at the top of his lungs, straining his voice as a crash erupted into the air. Debris launched at the child's form in the air and came in contact with his soft skin. He let out a sharp cry of pain and crashed to the ground, rolling over multiple times. Rushed footsteps ran past his form on the ground and to the truck, completely ignoring the injured child. This person was the child's mother as she screamed his father's name at the top of her lungs, crying out in sorrow and grief. From her view, blood was splattered under the overturned box truck, the blood of her husband, and it was all that child's fault. That useless, powerless child. He caused Hisashi's death, not the altercation between the hero and villain. He did. Izuku Midoriya killed his father that day in the eyes of his mother. And from then out, his life was like a never-ending nightmare, as if he is unable to wake up, trapped without a way out. Chapter 1. Green eyes open to the pitch black of the cramped space he was forced into the night before, his body aching and his stomach yowling in protest to be fed. The frequent pains in his back were worse than it had been the day before. Lately, the quirkless child had been getting back pains. Sometimes they're manageable, but others prove to be so painful that he's bedridden. If his mother actually allowed him without a beating for being lazy. Stomping footsteps erupted through the silence towards his spot in the black box. Then it was slammed open. The familiar expression of disgust filled the boy's view as his dull eyes met raging green ones. "Out!" barked the once tender and sweet voice of his mother. The boy followed her command and crawled from his spot. As he stood, pops sounded from his bones, here and there pain flaring through his system. His eyes trailed to the ground as he kept his shoulders slouched and head low. A sinister smile formed on the female's face as she glared at the child. He was obedient to her every word after learning the hard way. "Get ready for school, brat," she ordered and walked off to make herself a meal. She only gave Izuku meals every now and then, letting him live off of the terrible food from the school he attends. If he's even able to eat in peace. Usually he's interrupted by his tormentors, the group Bakugo Katsuki used to hang out with, though the explosive male abandoned that group when he saw the way they were treating the bush-haired male. He left the house right after the order, going to school. Like usual, he was encountered in the morning and beaten. Then he was ridiculed during his classes and beaten once again after school. But for once I was able to eat during lunch. He was forever grateful for that. Once he got home, the stench of alcohol filled his senses. Even if he was 7 years old at the time, he recognized the scent from the frequency his mother came home with it. He didn't know what to expect next, though. "Get the fuck out, rat!" she yelled, slurring her words, showing how drunk the female was. "Get your shit and leave. Never come back," she growled in a low tone. "If you do, I'll kill you like you killed your father." Her words held a sense of meaning in them, and he quickly got to work. The child grabbed what little stuff he had and shoved it into a bag. Only the necessities, as he left the rest. He had left and noticed the darkening sky. A variety of pinks, reds, and oranges painted the sky, being the backdrop to puffy white clouds, holding no sign of rain. With a sigh, the child walked his way deeper into the city of Musatofu. Once getting deeper, the child took a dip into an alleyway, hoping to find good shelter for the night. Well, as good as you could get on the streets. The night was relatively quiet, to the pleasure of Izuku. He blankly stared up at the night sky as he sat down on a pile of cardboard he had gathered. He was getting closer to sleeping until a pain erupted in his back. A strangled cry escaped his lips as his body fell forward onto the pavement in front of his cardboard setup. Izuku gripped his clothes tight as the pain increased. Soon enough, a ripping sound filled the air as a weight pushed the child to the ground. But the child wouldn't be able to check what was happening to him as he lost consciousness. When he woke up, everything seemed so much louder and brighter, so much stronger sense than before. The stench of the trash beside him bothered him much more with the intensity of the smell. He let out a soft groan and left himself on the ground. What happened the night before to cause that type of pain? He wasn't dead. That's for sure. His questions were answered once something brushed against his arm. It was soft and comforting. He brought himself to sit up abruptly and brought his hands to his back. But once he touched something soft, his hand recoiled in surprise. He looked behind him to see the back of his shirt ripped immensely, and in the hole of his shirt were wings. Dark green feathery wings, a pair of 4 wings adorning his back. To say he was surprised was an understatement, but he held back a yell of surprise by biting his lip. A bad idea. He hissed as pain flared on his bottom lip, a drop of blood falling down his lip and his chin. His right hand lifted to his mouth and brushed over his teeth, feeling the sharpness. He glanced at his hands and noticed how sharp his nails looked. It was all intriguing. Wait, this means that he has a quirk. He had finally gained a quirk. A late bloomer, but it didn't relate to either of his parents. That was so odd. Multiple thoughts raced through his mind, every now and then words escaping from his troubled mind and to his mouth. A bad habit he should get rid of. But what would he do now that he had a quirk? He couldn't really go to school now that he was kicked out. He still wanted to be a hero. What was the next best option? It clicked to him as his dull eyes momentarily brightened. The usual green, a toxic color now. He could become a vigilante. He will become Yami. Chapter 2. For the next few years, the boy trained himself mentally and physically. A little over 2 years of being on his own, he started vigilante work. They had named him Yami for the dark clothing he wears all the time. He grew to bring fear to villains as they caught a glimpse of his large green wings. It didn't take long before heroes and police were on his case. One detective, known as Naimasa Tsukachi, was the leading officer trying to practically learn more about Izuku. No specifics are given for things such as age or name. Everything like that is a complete mystery to the police. All they know about his quirk is his 4 giant green wings on his back. But no one in the database has that quirk. This brings them to a roadblock of finding out the person. A brunette male walked through the door of the cave, the ding of the door signifying his arrival as he made his way towards a table. At this table sat a male with messy black hair. The hair reached down to his shoulders as he slumped in the booth, wishing to be asleep. Aizawa greets the brown-haired male with a small smile as he takes off his hat. A grunt in return was his only response. It was obvious the black-haired male Aizawa was not in the mood. "Tsukachi," he murmurs in a monotone-esque voice. The male let out a quiet chuckle as he set his hat down on the table and took a seat. This caused Aizawa to grumble at him, muttering something along the lines of, "Shut it." "Aizawa, how's your class?" he asks half-heartedly, knowing full well that most have been expelled by now. No one is hardworking enough to be a pro. He let out his response in an annoyed tone. That seemed to be one of the problems for his foul mood, it seemed. But did he expel the whole class already? Well, you were never wrong. Tsukachi paused and glanced at the waiters, his eyes landing on a short male with unruly green hair and a pair of green wings. "Let's just get a coffee, then we can talk," he finishes, trailing off at the end as his eyes locked on the thin frame of the male. The male, who seemed to feel the eyes, slowly turned to meet the eyes with the brown-haired male. His eyes were a toxic green, holding a cold feeling to them, sending a shiver down his spine. At that he turned away swiftly and let out a sigh. Damn, kids are weird these days. "What can I get for you?" asks a plain voice, holding a faint tone of kindness. This made the man look back up, only to stiffen at the winged male being in front of him. The green-haired male stared between the two with an eyebrow raised. "I'll get a medium black coffee," answered Aizawa first, letting the boy write down the order in his pad. He then looked at Tsukachi expectantly. "Oh, I'll have a medium coffee, with some creamer packets," he shouted abruptly before lowering his voice. The boy nodded and wrote it down. At his brief pause, Tsukachi noticed the amount of old scars he had. It made his blood boil. The boy seemed to be a teen, probably getting some cash for his own wishes. And with that brief glance, the barista walked off to give the order to the cave chefs. "Did you see that boy?" asked the male, glancing at Aizawa. Before Aizawa had answered, he shook it off and waved his hands. Never mind. Let's get to talking of the subject at hand. Aizawa shrugged. I can guess who it's about, the male stated plainly. It was about the case that both of them were joined on. Yeah, Yami, have you gained anything else about him? At his question, Aizawa shook his head and grumbled. No, his words trailed, the annoyance evident. We've been chasing the vigilante for 5 years now. I know, and we still haven't found anything to be helpful in this case. Those words that left Tsukachi's mouth made Aizawa sigh. He's elusive, and it seems as if he knows all the hero's weaknesses. What if that is something else with his quirk? A confused look made it on Tsukachi's face, and he shook his head. That would only be possible if the conversation continued until their waiter walked over. The young barista gave them their drinks and wished them well. Before he could leave fully, the boy was asked something. What's that under your ears? Aizawa inquired. This made Tsukachi notice the quarter-sized black dots under the boy's ear. Tsukachi activated his quirk as the boy answered. Just something to help me out, the boy answered in a monotone voice. Truth. With what? That question left the boy in silence for a couple of seconds before he answered. It helps me with work. Truth. He was about to ask again, only to have his phone go off. It was a message. His eyes widened at the contents of the message, and he quickly retrieved his things. He nodded to Aizawa, then the boy, and quickly made it to the door. Something came up. Later, Aizawa, he called before exiting, the ring of the bell answering a goodbye to him. The boy watched the retreating figure of the man and let out a barely audible sigh of relief. Unknown to him, Aizawa had heard it as he examined the problem child. What was that for? He asked to have the boy look at him. His dull eyes examined Aizawa before speaking. I don't like being questioned about personal things, he answered, if it was as plain as day. The lie slipped off his tongue like butter. And with that, the boy got to work. Chapter 3. After the close call, Izuku had ended his shift early. He didn't want to have a breakdown of some sort during work and lose money. His money was fairly crucial for him to acquire, or he wouldn't have much food, and the boy didn't want to go through that once again. Starving yourself isn't a great feeling, he had learned. It was late at night. The boy stood on the edge of a roof. The city lights were his only view as his green eyes focused on the bright colors and lights. His peace was interrupted by a crash. A huff left his lips, and he started on his way towards the noise, spreading out his wings and launching himself into the sky. The beating of his wings made little to no noise in the quiet night, and his form blended in with the night sky. But the boy paid little mind to that as he rushed to the noise. He landed on top of a roof to witness a bloodied person being thrown into a dumpster, their unconscious form being tossed around. The culprit had been a bulky male with scales and a large reptilian tail, a mutation quirk like his. With that examination, he rushed in and struck the attacker with a bow staff. This had little effect as the man just glared at Izuku. With a shout of anger, the male charged at Izuku, who swiftly dodged. Unexpectedly, the male clutched onto one of Izuku's wings, crushing it in his grasp. This sent a shocking pain in his wing as he suppressed a cry of pain. He hissed in protest and ripped his bow staff in half. The two halves were now eskrima sticks. He jabbed one into the side of the male, shocking him with an electrical charge, setting himself free. Izuku struck the male with multiple kicks to the head until he finally got knocked out. A pant left his lips as his now injured wing lay limp, a stinging sensation coming from it. Before going to the victim, Izuku tied up the villain and moved towards the person in the dumpster. His eyes widened barely at the figure who he immediately recognized. It was Eraserhead, otherwise known as Aizawa, a teacher at UA. He dragged the male out and quickly assessed his wounds. Seemed to be lacerations on the skin, and his wrist was at an odd angle. He had obviously broken it. With a sigh, the male resorted to the second best option. Take the male to be treated at one of his bases. The emptiest one would be the best, so if that one is compromised, it wouldn't affect him in any way. He left a note on the villain and used a burner phone to call emergency services to pick up the villain. He then took Aizawa in his arms and flew into the sky with his good wings. It was a struggle to fly with only 3 wings, his balance way off. Eventually, the two of them were at a vacant warehouse. It had been abandoned for years and used to be known for suspicious activity and drug deals. He opened the crooked door to the warehouse and set Aizawa down on a mat once they were inside. The warehouse was lit from the moon shining above, having no other source of light. That was unless attention wanted to be drawn there. Izuku gathered the medical supplies he had and started to work on Aizawa. His injured wing had been hanging limply to the side. Some of the bones were probably broken. Once he had finished with that, he treated his own wing. Well, tried, keyword tried, as it took multiple times before he could wrap the wing against his back. While he was doing this, he didn't notice the eyes watching him struggle. It was quite amusing with the curses every now and then. His toxic green eyes launched to meet with black ones. His glare had softened as he realized the underground hero was awake. "I'm glad you're up," Izuku calmly states, a faint smile under his mask. "Why did you treat me instead of bringing me to a hospital?" inquired Eraserhead. With those words, Izuku fished out a notebook. He ripped out the pages he was meaning to deliver. "I wanted it to be easier to deliver these," he answered back, setting down the stack of about 15 pages of information. "There's a new group running around and trying to cause havoc. All the information I've got on them is there," he stated with a plain tone. Another thing Yami was known for was giving away information. Important information on villains or vigilantes he didn't favor, as well as some corrupt heroes who get thrown in jail after the information he gives usually. Though Yami was wishing to give info on the infamous Endeavor, he has no proof. "I can trust you with this more. You'll give it to the detective or Nezu." Aizawa sighed as he rubbed his face with his uninjured hand and sat up slowly with a small wince. "I guess I could say thank you for the information," grumbled the hero as he stared at the papers before picking them up. Once he looked back up, Yami was gone, without a trace. The warehouse held no echo of other sounds, and this caused Aizawa to sigh. That was an often thing with Yami. He was there a second, and gone the next. His eyes scanned over the neat handwriting, and his eyes widened at the information. He had to get this to Tsukachi and Nezu. With that, he dialed in a number, telling his location. The next months will be filled with anticipation of what is to come, with the knowledge Yami had given, as well as the overshadowing presence of the new group, the League of Villains. Chapter 4. A week has passed since Yami had given Aizawa the information he had gathered. Detective Tsukachi has copied off of them and put them in a flash drive, giving Yue the originals. Now the entrance exams of Yue are right around the corner. Izuku was in his casual clothes, wearing a green sweater that covered over the two lower wings, having a hole in the back for the top wings. His left lower wing was wrapped against his body, the feathers soothing him in a way, but he couldn't use that wing because it was still injured. He didn't know what he did to it. All he knows is that it should heal on its own. Izuku was lost in his thoughts when he ran into someone. He stood in place while the other person fell backwards. Izuku examined the person, seeing a male with gravity-defying purple hair. "Are you okay?" asks Izuku with a monotone voice, his head tilting slightly to the right. The male looked up at Izuku with a small glare in his eyes. It softened when Izuku offered his hand. The purple-haired male grabbed Izuku's hand, and he hoisted the male up to his feet. Cold eyes looked up at tired ones before nodding and starting to walk off. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Izuku heard before his wrist was caught by the male he had run into. "Don't you know manners?" the purple-haired male asked in a stoic manner. "What do you mean by that?" asked Izuku with confusion seeping through his cold eyes. What was he supposed to do? Kiss his injuries and wish him well? You say sorry after doing something like that. Izuku tilted his head to the side and muttered a simple, "Why?" "Ugh, I have no time for you," the purple-haired male said and started to walk off. This time it was his turn to have his wrist grabbed. "I can make it up to you," voiced Izuku, "if you like coffee." After the encounter with the male, who he now knows as Shinsu Hitoshi, Izuku had bought him a coffee to make it up. Then they started to meet up more, going out as two antisocial males. It was quite the experience for Izuku, as he never had someone to talk to so casually. He considered the male a friend, his first legitimate friend. It was another shift for Izuku, a late-night shift. Only him and another person were running the store. It was not occupied. Only a few people. One of those individuals was Shinsu. Not only him, but the detective Tsukachi and Aizawa. Someone barged through the glass door, breaking it off its hinges and sending it flying. It went towards Izuku, and the glass cut into his skin. Before it could hit the wall he was next to, he jumped out of the way and behind the counter. A bellowing voice filled his sensitive words as he stayed crouched down. "Don't move a muscle, or this kid gets shot." At those words, Izuku had snuck out the back. He slipped his vigilante outfit on and activated his mask before rushing to the front. Slowly, Izuku crouched down and inched closer to the front door to get a better view. With calculating toxic green eyes, Izuku scanned the situation. Aizawa and Tsukachi were forced on their knees, otherwise the hostage would get shot. Izuku's eyes widened when he noticed the hostage. It was Shinsu. He sucked in a breath and got ready to strike. It seemed like Shinsu thought to act first. Shinsu kicked the person holding him in the foot. He then dashed towards cover, but this wasn't fast enough as the villain got ready to fire. Izuku launched forwards and tackled the villain to the ground as a shot rang out. Swiftly, he tied the villain up and let out a sigh of relief. "Yami!" yelled Shinsu in surprise, but his breath hitched when he examined the person more. "You're bleeding," he pointed out, making Izuku take notice of his wound. With his voice changer active, Izuku talked. "This is fine. I'm just glad you're safe." And with that he dashed off, spreading out his wings and launching into the air before Aizawa could try to catch him. This was a struggle trying to fly with his recently healed wing, and he held pressure to the new wound on his side. This would be one annoying thing to deal with. And with that, I'll see you all in the next part. For those who are interested, we have a Discord down below. Be sure to aim for the stars, drink plenty of water, and for us to cause chaos. With that, take care until next we see each other again.